I never learned how to chug a beer in college, but I learned how to chug a beer at Morgan Stanley. Venture capital is a lot of guesswork and a lot of luck and a lot of throwing darts at a dartboard. Dan said, we're going to start you with $200 million. Let's do 100 and see how it goes. And if it goes well, we'll do another 100. And he also said, look, if this goes well, we don't give guarantees here, but you'll make more than you could imagine in your wildest dreams. I realized that if I wanted to do this the way I wanted to do it with all the things I wanted, I was going to have to do it myself.
Hello and welcome to First Money In, a show focused on now extraordinary founders and their first time ever raising capital. My name is Nicole Wishoff and I am thrilled to bring you our latest episode. Today we welcome Keri Findley, the founder and managing partner at Tacora Capital. Tacora Capital provides venture debt to VC-backed startups. Tacora Capital's first fund was raised just a few years ago and was over $300 million. An interesting stat, but Keri's first fund is Peter Thiel's second largest investment ever outside a founder's fund. And as of last week, Keri just did a massive close of almost $270 million for her fund too. Join us as we dive into her story, landing on Wall Street in finance out of college, working for Third Point for almost 8 years, and landing over a $200 million commitment from Peter over dinner one night. Keri, thank you so much for joining First Money In. As I was texting you, I saw a flashy headline on Instagram on Traded VCs that you guys, Tacora Capital, has had a massive first close. Is that correct? For
That's
your
right,
fund
yeah.
too?
Yep.
Yes. So today we're going to dig into you, all things Keri, your background, and hopefully we'll start with a high-level overview of private credit so that for the folks that are listening that know a lot more about maybe just venture, what in the world is it, and how did you end up in this crazy world? But maybe just start with your story and we can weave through that, like from finance, Wall Street, just go for it.
So I grew up in LA. I figure skated every day my entire childhood and teenage years. And then I went to Columbia University. I had no idea what finance was. All I knew that when I was 12 years old, my friend Julia invited me on a ski trip. And we went on this ski trip. It was in Beaver Creek, Colorado. And we each had our own ski instructors and the restaurants were closed down for us for lunch. And I couldn't understand what was going on. And I remember coming home and telling my Mom, this was the coolest thing I ever did. I want to work at Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette, which is, I didn't know at the time, but it was an investment bank. I just thought it was so cool that restaurants on the ski hill shut down for them. I had no idea what it was. And that was the first thing I ever knew about finance. I, again, knew nothing about finance growing up, even going to college. And then one day I called my dad and I was like, Dad, I want to stay here for the summer. And he was like, get a job. And so I went to the Career Center. I had them help me with my resume and applied to every job on the Columbia University job board. And that was consulting, fashion, which was not for me, and finance. So I applied to a whole host of consulting and finance jobs and ended up at Morgan Stanley in ABS CDO research. But I didn't know what finance was. I didn't know the difference between banking and consulting and sales and trading. I was told the hours were better in sales and trading, and that was really all I knew.
Were you a great student in math? Like, was that
I
just
was
your
always
thing?
excellent at math, always.
Okay, yeah.
My favorite class in college was stochastic calculus. I got, I think, 800s on the math, SAT, SAT2. Math was always my strong suit. I was never a very good writer.
Okay, got it. And then consulting, I guess you could say you can think strategically. I don't know that it's that hard. Would that have been an okay path had you gotten a great job doing that too?
I mean, probably, but the good consulting firms, you had to have a 3.7 GPA, which I did not. In investment banking and sales and trading, they were a little more lenient on the GPA.
Got it. And I think I remember you saying in a separate conversation, I think now that we're exiting this like crazy woke world we've been living in for the last few years, but you were a woman coming out of college and working in finance. Was that world like maybe any different than it is now, or did it even matter?
So I don't know. When I graduated college, I went to an analyst program at Morgan Stanley. There were 50 of us. It was 25 young women and 25 young men. I always would say, what are people talking about? What do they mean there's no women? Like, there's 25 in my analyst class. Within 2 years, though, most of the women were gone and most of the men were not. And that was kind of the first time I realized it. But yes, it was difficult. Like, I never learned how to chug a beer in college, but I learned how to chug a beer at Morgan Stanley. Like,
It's amazing.
I would often go to work from 6 to 5. At 5 p.m., one of the sales guys, and in research, you service the salespeople and their clients. And one of the sales guys would yell, "Everybody, conference room H." And conference room H was a bar on 48th Street called Hurley's that was basically attached to Morgan Stanley, and would say things like, "If you're not on my team at night, don't be on my team tomorrow." I mean, things that, like, I don't know how those things would be perceived today. I hope it's not like that today, but obviously I'm not there and I don't know.
Yeah, it made me think of like an episode of Industry. Part of me wishes we could get back there a little bit. Maybe not the insane intensity, but like a little bit more of the like camaraderie of we're a team, we work late, we work hard, and just get
for sure.
stuff done. Yes. So you did a stint. I know there was a few things that happened, but maybe walk me through it. You did a really long stint at Third Point, but you didn't. That wasn't a straight line to getting there. So how did you end up there? What was that path like?
After Morgan Stanley, I was working at a fund called DB's Wern. And people kind of forget it because it's a long time ago and DB's Wern blew up. But DB's Wern was like the fund for specialty finance. It was them and Fortress. They were kind of the stars of the market. There were some copycats starting to pop up, but DB's Wern was like the kind of best cream of the crop of specialty finance. I worked for this really great guy named Ray Chan and this other really great guy named Rob Flowers, and I would have stayed there and stayed with them forever. I learned a lot of who I wanted to be from them. I learned a lot of how I wanted to run a business. They were both really incredible talents, but also people. And that kind of gave me a lot of lessons that I took into Third Point. But DB's Wern was going out of business in 2008, not because of the crisis, but because the founder bought a plane with investor capital. Allegedly, there's a bunch of news articles about it, and then paid it back, and there was like controls issues and all that kind of stuff. But we were looking for a place for the team. They were trying to find a place to bring 9 people in the middle of the financial crisis. And that proved too much of a lift, and I ended up getting an offer to start and run the structured credit business at Third Point. I was in my mid-20s. It was pretty incredible. But yeah, no, I never would have left the DB's Wern team had that not happened. And in my mid-20s, I was given the opportunity to start this business at Third Point, and I'll never forget, Dan said, "We're going to start you with $200 million. Let's do 100 and see how it goes. And if it goes well, we'll do another 100. And he also said, "Look, if this goes well, we don't give guarantees here, but you'll make more than you could imagine in your wildest dreams. And if it doesn't go well, you won't be here very long and probably won't even be here for the first guarantee
How
cycle."
old were you at the time?
I think I was 25 or 26. It was pretty wild.
That is crazy. And for the folks listening, what is specialty finance and structured credit? Like, walk us through what those things, what that is.
Yeah, so structured credit is the probably best way to describe it is the securitization of loans, leases. Structured credit is taking a pool of mortgages and chopping them up into a bunch of bonds. Structured credit would be the same thing with auto loans, with personal loans, with credit cards. GM, just for instance, when they sell you a car, they also usually sell you an auto loan or an auto lease. And they take those loans and leases and they drop them into a securitization. Out comes a bunch of bonds that there could be a 1-year AAA bond. There could be a 3-year AAA bond. AAA bonds are bonds rated the highest. There could be bonds that are not AAA. There could be bonds that are not investment grade. And so really, structured credit is the repackaging of loans and leases or contractual obligations. You asked about specialty finance is things like rediscount lending. Rediscount lending means lending to a lender against loans that they have originated. And then it's things like lending to someone who wants to do invoice finance, lending to someone who wants to finance purchase orders. Any loan against a financial asset, in my opinion, would be called specialty finance.
Got it. Okay. So you end up shifting gears. You're obviously now doing structured credit. You're at Third Point. Walk me through that. So obviously the heater was on you from the beginning, like, hey, here's a ton of rope.
For sure.
Like, ton of rope. Let's go. Here's the keys to the kingdom. Like, don't screw it up. How quickly were you rising to the top? You were there for 8 years? So I'm assuming it was like pretty high intensity the entire time.
It was insane. I don't even know how to describe it. This guy who had been there a couple of years comes up to me my first week and he's like, "So I have some good advice for you." And I was like, "I'd love to hear it." And he goes, "If your first trade doesn't work out, you're not going to be here very long and you're not going to have the rope to do a second. But if it does, the amount of rope that'll give you will just multiply. He was probably right, but like, obviously I wanted my first trade to work out. I didn't want to lose money like day one, but I mean, I got there and I just started, it was in the depths of the financial crisis, and I just started buying risk. And it could have gone the other way. Maybe I was too naive to think it could have. I don't know, but
Do you remember your first trade or how big it was or anything?
INDX 2007 AR1 2A1. Yes, it was 40 million bonds.
Okay.
I remember almost every bond I've ever traded. And what that means is there were loans, mortgage loans, Alt-A mortgage loans, which is between prime and subprime, originated by a bank called IndyMac in 2007. And Group 2 was the non-Fannie and Freddie, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac eligible group of loans. And I think I bought it at around 38 to 39 cents on the dollar. But yeah, I remember most bonds I've traded. It's like a nice party trick sometimes. After a few drinks, I could tell you about all of them.
That's insane. All right, I'm going to take you up on this, though, at some point when I get my butt to Austin. Okay, so you're there. Had you ever, because we're going to obviously transition, so you've started Tacora Capital. You're obviously just had a massive first close, almost $300 million for your fund two. It's private credit funds. What led to that? And had you raised money at Third Point, or was your first time raising money from investors when you went out to raise fund one?
I mean, I was part of the process at Third Point, but what I would say is I had no idea what the process was like. So I'm at Third Point, I'd get an email from IR, please be in this room at this time. And I'd be in that room at that time, and I'd talk about what I did, but I had no idea what starting raising to finalizing raising actually was. Telling investors what you do for 30 minutes and getting them a couple sound bites so that they have the complete picture of what Third Point was doing is very different than today. It is just us, and we are talking for hours about just us, and we're talking about not just what we do, but the infrastructure we're building. It's a very, very different process. So while I would say I was a very small part of fundraising at Third Point, I had no idea what a slog it was.
I agree with that. What led to this? Did you always want to found something and raise your own funds, or what was sort of the push to do that?
Oh God, never. No, I really didn't. I left Third Point. My business and my ideas were going more illiquid, and Third Point offered their investors 90-day liquidity. It just wasn't what I wanted to do, wasn't fitting. And we were finding ways to make it fit in some ways, but like it really just didn't nicely fit into what Third Point wanted to do. Third Point at the time didn't have separate funds, didn't want to have separate funds. And so I kind of honestly at one point thought I wanted to be a venture capitalist. So I left Third Point and moved to the Valley, and I didn't know what I was going to do.
What year was this?
2017.
Okay.
I had a long garden leave. I just kind of like thought I was going to figure it out later. And as I started to look at different venture capital firms and being a venture capitalist, no offense to you, but I realized that in my opinion, venture capital is a lot of guesswork and a lot of luck and a lot of throwing darts at a dartboard. And I often joke,
math and finance.
Yes.
Yes.
But I often joke that there are things you can do to make your dartboard bigger and give you a better chance at success, but it's very hard to make your throw any more exact. I think there are things the best venture capitalists do that really do improve their chances of success, but I didn't see that as my future. So first I actually looked at doing my credit fund inside a venture capital firm. And there were a handful that wanted to do it. The ones I liked weren't ready to SEC register, which you have to do for credit, you don't for venture. Venture capitalists can operate under this thing called the 1940 Act exemption. Credit funds cannot. And so some of the funds weren't ready to SEC register. At some points I just wasn't ready. Some wanted to do it within their firm, and I had fears that if I do this within a firm, the founders of the firm are going to be like, wait, you have to lend to this one. Wait, you're not going to lend to this one. You had to find a place that fit, and nothing just felt like the right fit. I looked at doing it with other credit managers where like I would be the small private credit, to venture-backed business group. It would help with their sourcing. But then in some of those larger organizations, there was bureaucracies. And while the founders wanted to do it, the next level down really didn't. And so it just didn't fit. And I realized that if I wanted to do this the way I wanted to do it with all the things I wanted, I was going to have to do it myself.
So I'm excited to jump into how you decided what fund size it was going to be and maybe talk through some strategy. But back in February of, last year now, I was in Miami, iConnections conference, and you and Peter Thiel are the headline conversation around private credit. And it was said that you are, and Tacora Capital, Peter's, I think, second largest investment outside of Founders Fund. How on earth, how did piece all this together for me?
I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I had become friendly with Peter, and I was at his house for dinner over a very long period of time. And he was like, well, how much do you need to do Fund 1? And I said 250 to 300. And he's like, I could do that, and I'd love to seed you. And I'd love to be your first and biggest investor. And I just was at the dinner table, and I'd kind of been starting the circuit of looking for capital and trying to figure out who that first anchor / first partner was going to be. And Peter said, I want to be your first and biggest investor, and I want to do the whole first fund. And I was not pitching him. It was unbelievably humbling and an honor, and he's been truly incredible.
And did that, any special treatment? I don't know if you're comfortable sharing, or was he like, hey, I'm treating you like any other investment, it's yours, you run it, and here's the capital?
Oh, it was you run it. The first month, I sent him the pipeline and was like, anything you want to go over? And he's like, I trust you to run this business. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. Obviously, he's one of the most prolific investors of my time. People know him as a very political guy or whatever, but I know him as the guy who put $500,000 into Facebook and turned it into $2 billion. And the guy who started PayPal, and the guy who started this great macro fund called Clarium, and the guy who started Palantir, and just one of the best investors. And so the idea that one of the world's best investors wanted to be my biggest investor was just kind of unbelievably cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. Walk me through too. We're obviously in an interesting interest rate environment, extremely high, probably from even when you originally raised Fund 1. But what was the idea and opportunity around private credit? Where are you focused, and what's the pitch?
The pitch is that back in 2013, Third Point invested in a company called SoFi. And we watched how difficult it was for them to get debt capital. And we ended up doing it. When they were starting their consumer loan program, we financed the assets because there really was no other option. And the way I like to think about it is, if you started a specialty finance business, SoFi would be considered a specialty finance business, in 2006, you would have gone to a Londis Bank, to Royal Bank of Scotland Prop Desk, JP Morgan Prop, SocGen Prop, Natixis Prop, and one of those prop desks would have funded your business. And they would have funded both the operating capital and the balance sheet capital. The operating capital pays for people, employees, operations, technology. The balance sheet capital is what funds the loans you're originating. And you would have had a waterfall, you would have had some rules you had to follow, but that your funders would have been a prop desk. Well, the prop desks had a double whammy in 2008 and 2009. 2008 was the financial crisis, and then I think it was 2009-10 was Dodd-Frank, which was financial regulation that abolished the prop desks. The prop desks did a lot of things, including buying very toxic CDOs during the financial crisis, and lost billions of dollars, and the banks had to be bailed out, or many of them did. And then Barney Frank and Chris Dodd came up with this regulation, financial crisis reform, I believe it was. And one of the things was they abolished prop desks. So this source of funding for these specialty finance businesses just kind of went away overnight. And capital flows and things moved, and venture started to proliferate. And the same entrepreneur who used to go to that prop desk now goes to a venture capitalist. But the venture capitalist only gives them operating capital. They only give them the money to fund people, operations, and technology. And then the balance sheet part of it has been kind of abandoned. I wanted to plug that hole. And I started plugging it at Third Point and have hopefully continued to plug it with Tacora. Tacora is funding balance sheet capital for heavy asset businesses. So businesses that have loans, leases, invoices, purchase orders, receivables, statutory capital, or equipment on their balance sheet. We will often help them to take that off their balance sheet and capitalize it in a separate capital structure. Peter was a big investor in a company called Affirm, and he noticed and saw the problem that I was solving firsthand. The problem we were solving was that companies who either have loans, leases, invoices, receivables, purchase orders, equipment, or statutory capital on their balance sheet don't have a funder to fund that. We started funding it as the balance sheet partner, and VCs fund it as the operating capital partner, meaning the VCs give you money for your people, your operations, your technology, and we give you money for the assets. Peter saw that happening again through a firm and hopefully thought that I would be a competent person to be able to do that business for him.
So when did you end up officially raising Fund 1, going out, and then are you fully deployed from that now that you're raising Fund 2, or is there some overlap?
So we went out and raised the first fund in 21 and 22. Tacora started fundraising in the summer of 21 and finished kind of into 22. We started investing on January 3rd of 22. And we are 100% committed, meaning that all of our money has been committed to companies, but our companies draw over time. So we may not actually advance you the money until you have originated those loans or originated those leases. And so it is not 100% drawn, but the deals are set in stone and already fully baked at this point.
Got it. And then for you, raising a private credit fund, is it similar in like raising a venture fund? Like for me, I might be raising for maybe up to a year, could be longer, and I'm pitching 100 plus LPs. Is it a similar sort of courting process?
I think our number has been a lot lower, but it could take a long time. I think we're in a really good place, and we started formally raising in September, and I think we'll be done by March at the latest. But yes, it's meeting people, figuring out who has interest. We get a lot of like, oh, your returns are really high. That takes us off our benchmark, which, sounds kind of ridiculous, but it is what it is. And then we also we're just over our privates allocation. We allocated too much to venture in 2020 and 21. We haven't gotten distributions. And, we're only supposed to have 37% privates. Private credit still falls into that. That is what it is. And so you know who to move on from and you know who to keep working with.
Right. And then in terms of LP type, are these large family offices? Are these like institutional LPs? Like what is the profile that's usually a good fit?
Yeah, it's large family offices. It's probably even considered mid-sized family offices. And then pensions, endowments, and foundations. And so far, we've had a really nice mix.
That's amazing. So for Fund 2, I think that's what you were mentioning. You started in September, obviously a huge first close, and then you're hoping to wrap things up in March. That's Fund 2, right? That wasn't referencing just Fund 1.
No, that's Fund 2.
That's amazing. And what has this process been similar or different from Fund 1, given that we're in maybe a different market?
So Fund 1, we didn't market broadly. We just went to people we already knew. So yes, this has been like courting a bunch of new people, trying to build new relationships. We have a bunch that I think it resonated with, and then a bunch that hopefully over time will get comfortable for Fund 3 and Fund 4.
Amazing. I love it. So if you're a founder or anyone on the lookout for private credit, like how should they contact you? I'm sure plenty of folks can use you. And maybe what's a good profile? Should they have already raised some venture capital and have money in the bank? Do you want to meet them right away? Like how should they think about you and how should they approach you?
If they have one of those 7 assets, again, their loans, leases, invoices, purchase orders, receivables, statutory capital, or equipment, we'd love to meet them. We don't care when. We can send them a term sheet before they've raised money. Maybe that helps them raise equity. We can send them a term sheet later. Whatever works for them works for us. They can reach me at Keri, Keri, at tacoracap.com. And we love to meet founders at any stage of their journey.
Love it, Carrie. Thank you so much for this. We are thrilled for you. Congratulations on a massive first close as well.
Thank you.